United States President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet in Vietnam for their second summit. Former military leader Muhammadu Buhari is elected to a second term as Nigeria's president. And Ghana declares 2019 as the year of return in a campaign targeting African Americans and diaspora to visit the West African nation. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories in a moment, but first, a tragic accident in Egypt has killed at least 20 people and injured more than 40 when a train smashed through the buffers at the main railway station in Cairo on Wednesday, that's according to the nation's health ministry. The fire sent black smoke billowing above the Ramses station in the center of the Egyptian capital. Shortly after the tragedy, the Minister of Transport, Hisham Arafat, resigned, according to Reuters. Inside the station, the train's blackened engine could be seen tilted to one side next to a platform. Several witnesses say they had seen fire coming out of the train's engine before it crashed, triggering an explosion and fire inside the station. Egypt has one of the oldest and largest rail networks in the region, and accidents causing casualties are fairly common. Health Minister Hala Zayed says authorities have not been able to identify many of the bodies recovered because they were too badly burned. Security sources say there was no indication that the crash was deliberate. U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have held an initial meeting and shared dinner in Vietnam as the second summit is underway. After both leaders held meetings elsewhere in Hanoi Wednesday, the two met for a greeting and meeting late in the day, as well as what was referred to as a social dinner. The two leaders greeted each other in front of a line of U.S. and North Korean flags Wednesday evening in the Vietnamese capital at the Sofitel Legend Metropole Hotel, reminiscent of the scene at the historic first summit last June in Singapore. President Trump greeted Kim as they sat down for brief talks.
It's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together in really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us. But I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first.
Well, a few minutes later, as the two sat down for dinner, Kim, through an interpreter, expressed confidence this second meeting would be a success. And before dismissing reporters, Trump agreed.
So we're going to have a very busy day tomorrow, and we'll probably have a pretty quick dinner. And a lot of things are going to be solved, I hope, and I think it'll lead to really a wonderful situation long term. And our relationship is a very special relationship.
Joining Trump for the dinner was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. A few hours before the dinner, on his Twitter account, Trump dismissed what he called false reporting about the summit and said he and Kim would work out denuclearization, which he predicted will make North Korea an economic powerhouse. Well, for more on the U.S.-North Korea summit in Vietnam, VOA White House correspondent Steve Hammond joins me live from Hanoi. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening from Hanoi.
Okay, now from what you're hearing, the president is trying to convince Kim to abandon his nuclear program. Up to this point, what is the vibe like, and what can be expected?
Well, what we do know is on the schedule for tomorrow is the signing of some sort of joint declaration. We have no idea what is going to be in that. Before that, there will be a resumption of a one-on-one meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim. And then after it's all over, the president is planning to have a news conference here tomorrow afternoon.
We know that this meeting was supposed to build on the previous meeting in Singapore. What was achieved then that can be the foundation for tomorrow's meeting?
Well, that summit that was held in Singapore was considered a success just because it happened. And there was a vague declaration about denuclearization. But Washington and Pyongyang have very big differences about the definition of denuclearization. Perhaps in the joint declaration tomorrow, we'll get a little bit more specific information on that. And there's also a lot of speculation here about whether there will be some reference to a peace treaty being signed between the United States and North Korea, as well as possibly an agreement to exchange liaison officers between the two countries, which have no diplomatic relations with each other.
Steve, some have looked at the meeting happening in Hanoi as a form of a kind of an incentive for North Korea. Is that something that has come out very openly and officially, that was purposely done so Kim can be inspired to do something?
Well, Kim just showing up and being seen as an equal beside the leader of the most powerful president in the world is something that is a huge victory for the North Korean leader. And just by showing up, he takes away something very substantial. Of course, what Kim Jong-un really wants is a lifting of these punitive sanctions against him for his nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. But the United States has been adamant that there has to be some demonstrable progress in denuclearization for those sanctions to be lifted. So any language that refers to some sort of timetable or steps for the lifting of those sanctions would be another big win for the North Korean leader.
Up to this point, do we know any form of incentive that the U.S. is giving to Kim?
Well, the incentive is, of course, a sanctions relief and some form of recognition, as I mentioned, not necessarily diplomatic recognition, but an exchange of liaison officers, and also talk about a peace treaty. North Korea has been insistent for decades that it wants to deal directly with the United States, not South Korea, which was not a signatory to the peace treaty, on formally ending the war on the Korean Peninsula, which was halted with an armistice, a truce, in 1953.
Well, Steve, we hope to hear from you tomorrow a bit more. Thank you very much for your excellent reporting. That's VOA White House correspondent Steve Herman reporting live from Hanoi in Vietnam. Now to West Africa. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has won the opportunity to lead the West African nation for the next 4 years. Buhari was re-elected as president according to Nigeria's electoral body. Mahmoud Yakubu, chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, on Wednesday said Buhari, and I quote here, the candidate from the governing All Progressives Congress Party, topped the poll with more than 15 million or 55.6% of the total valid votes. In the presidential election held last Saturday, following an election marred by delays, logistical glitches and violence, Buhari defeated his main opposition candidate, Atiku Abubakar, a businessman and former vice president, who secured 41% of the votes. The president has a daunting to-do list, from reviving an economy still struggling to recover from a 2016 recession to quelling a decade-old Islamist insurgents in the Northeast. President Buhari says he will reform the economy, combat graft and improve security, and he urged supporters not to gloat or humiliate the opposition.
I thank the millions of Nigerians who voted to re-elect me as your president for the next 4 years. I am deeply humbled and profoundly grateful to you for judging me worthy of continuing to serve you for your peaceful conduct.
Opposition candidate Atiku Abubakar is rejecting the outcome, saying one obvious red flag was that states in the Northeast ravaged by insurgents attacks generated much higher voter turnouts than peaceful states. Well, for more reaction on the Nigerian election, VOA's Peter Clottey joins me live from Lagos. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Vincent. How are you?
I am fine. Now you are in the largest city in Africa. Tell us, what has been the reaction there after this declaration by the Electoral Commission?
Vincent, supporters of President Muhammadu Buhari went agog, shouting and screaming that they will be popping champagne at any time from all corners of Lagos. Now, they have quickly started re-strategizing for the gubernatorial election, which will be coming in 2 weeks' time, despite the celebration so far.
Now, Atiku Abubakar is saying he does not recognize this election. First, how strong are his allegations, and what is the next course of action?
Well, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar might hide a point because he went round and there are social media posts with evidence of young people voting up in the north. Similarly, people around his strongholds were beaten, some were intimidated, some were harassed. So these are the reasons why he said these are a sham elections and that he will not recognize it.
But given the history of Nigeria and actually many countries in Africa, what are the chances that he can actually have this overturned or some other action taken that will affect the final outcome?
Well, legal luminaries that I have spoken with so far said there is no precedent for that an election that has been won perhaps by an incumbent president has been overturned. It's never happened in Nigeria before. So the prospect of him chalking a success in the courts are almost negligible. However, some others are saying that it is the legal process. He has to take it, he has to challenge it and test the court to see the independence of the court. However, some are saying he should just let it go, prepare for next 4 years, and perhaps he could be lucky next time around.
Or he could be too old. Peter, thank you very much for your reporting. That's VOA's Peter Clottey reporting live from Lagos. Not too far from there, the votes are being tallied in Senegal, and incumbent President Macky Sall is widely expected to win presidency. Early unofficial figures provided by local media and a source inside the Electoral Commission have declared Sall the winner, but those numbers are being refuted by the opposition, who say the results show that Sall has won the required 50% of votes has rather not won the required 50% of the votes to avoid a runoff next month against a second-placed candidate. Sall has won popularity for driving economic growth during his first term, building highways and an airport and widening the electricity grid. Yet, the opposition and rights groups say he has used his influence to bar major candidates from running in the election because of corruption convictions. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54. Ghana reaches out to African Americans and the diaspora. But first, a look at Wednesday's headlines.
In Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari has claimed victory in his quest for another 4-year term in a national election. His opponent calls it a sham. In Egypt, the media reports that about 20 people were killed and more than 40 were injured Wednesday when a passenger train crashed into a barrier and burned at Cairo's main rail station. In Algeria, thousands of students protested Tuesday in the capital and other cities for a 5th day in a row. That's against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's plan to extend his 20-year rule by seeking a 5th term. In Burkina Faso, director Apolline Traoré makes a new plea for women with her film d'errance, screened at FESPACO, the Pan-African Film and Television Festival in Ouagadougou.
Well, 2019 marks 400 years of the first enslaved African arriving in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. And Ghana has announced plans to make this year eventful. Africa 54's Esther Githo-Ewart has more. Esther.
That's right, Vincent. Ghana has declared 2019 as the year of return in a campaign targeting African Americans and diaspora to visit the West African nation. Ghana's Tourism Authority and the Ministry of Tourism are spearheading the year-long calendar of activities in partnership with the Office of Diaspora Affairs at the Office of the Ghanaian President. And joining me now with more on the year of return is Dinah Ajay Bawa, wife of the Ghanaian ambassador to the United States. Dinah, welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks for having me.
You know, first of all, this should be exciting and even transformational for a lot of African Americans who will be visiting Ghana for the first time. But what should they expect once they arrive at the airport? Who is there to welcome them home?
My first advice is for people to travel with tour companies, and also the Embassy of the United States, Ghana's Embassy to the United States, is setting up a secretariat so that people, African Americans who want to travel to Ghana, can have first-hand information before they set out to Ghana.
But then again, the question you hear once this year of return was announced late last year by the president of Ghana here in Washington is, do they have in place or plans to have discounted tickets for African Americans and the diaspora to visit Ghana, or even places where they might be able to be accommodated at, you know, discounted prices as well?
Yes, currently we are talking to South African Airways and United Airlines to give a discounted ticket for people, African Americans, who want to travel to Ghana. It's ongoing, and I believe that by the end of the month of March, everything will be in place, especially for hotels and for tour groups, so that people can take advantage of this.
So once they get there, tell us, highlight some of the activities that they should expect to see what is lined up for these guests.
Okay, so we have a whole year calendar for the year of return. So I think if you go to the Ministry of Tourism, the website, you can see all the activities outlined for the year. And then you have to pitch in which one you think you will like or you will enjoy. And I think that will make life easier for you, instead of just going and maybe not meeting what your expectations are. So I think the best and the first step is really look at the activities, because it's every month there's something going. So the best thing is for you to just see what you want and take advantage of it.
But what are some of the must-see places? Because you want to hear some feedback when they come back here.
Of course. We have 40 sites where slaves were kept before they were transshipped into the Americas. And the ones close to home, that is the capital, is the Elmina Castle, James Fort, Cape Coast Castle. So I think these are in the proximity of the capital, and therefore they should be targeted. And then you can take advantage of the rest of the 37, and then you can, I'll visit those places as well.
Now, we've heard since the announcement about the year of return that Ghana would be offering citizenship to African Americans. Would dual citizenship come into play here? How is that, if you can briefly tell us?
Okay, yes, I think in 2007, coincided with Ghana's 50th anniversary. And during that time, my president was the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and in conjunction with tourism, declared a Joseph Project. And in the project, they put out an act in Parliament which gave the right of abode to African Americans who want to come to Ghana and settle. So if indeed people want to take advantage of this, they can have a dual citizenship by applying to the Embassy of Ghana in Washington, and they will be, each case will be looked at, and then they can take advantage of the dual citizenship. So currently, we have about 3,000 African Americans who live in Ghana as Ghanaians.
And the feedback?
Very good.
It's great.
They took advantage of the Black History Month. It was marked and celebrated, you know, in grand style in Accra.
Diana, thank you so much
for
talking to us. Diana Eje-Bawuah is the wife of the Ghanaian ambassador to the United States. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thank you. The U.S. House of Representatives rebuked President Donald Trump on Tuesday, passing a rare resolution to reverse his declaration of an emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border. But the effort to stop the president from shifting funds to build a border wall faces a much tougher fight in the U.S. Senate and a veto threat at the White House. VOA congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson reports from Capitol Hill.
No crisis at the nation's southern border. That's the message from House Democrats and a handful of Republicans trying to reverse the president's national emergency declaration.
The president consistently said that any wall would be paid for by Mexico. Well, Mexico refused to pay, and Congress refused to pay. And so the president, rather than letting things be, decided that he would act unilaterally, unconstitutionally.
The declaration allows the president to move $6 billion in funding from approved projects, most of them military, to build a border wall. It's a move House Republican leadership says is within Trump's right as president.
What we see happening along the border, the amount of drugs, the amount of deaths in America, the human trafficking that's coming across, the overwhelming problem there. So the president has the authority to do it.
But lawmakers on both sides are concerned that such a move would set a dangerous precedent by usurping the power of the purse from Congress.
I'm hopeful that a lot of our Republican friends will vote out of conscience and concern for the Constitution and not out of politics and concern for party.
3 Republican senators have already said they plan to support the resolution when the Senate takes up consideration in March.
This is not about whether or not you support ensuring that our borders are strong and secure, which I absolutely do. This is about making sure that we respect the lines and the lanes of authorities that are laid out in the Constitution.
And while Leader Mitch McConnell said there's no doubt about a crisis on the border,
you can't blame the president for trying to use whatever tool he thinks he has to address it.
Trump's usually reliable ally admitted he hadn't yet reached a conclusion about the legality of the move. But unless a veto-proof majority of senators rebuke the president, he will have the ultimate say.
Will I veto it? 100%. 100%. And I don't think it survives a veto. We have too many smart people that want border security.
Making the 16 lawsuits currently in U.S. courts the only remaining option for reversing the declaration. Katherine Gibson, VOA News, Capitol Hill.
On to Europe now. The famed annual Venice Carnival is in full swing with revelers donning beautiful costumes and extraordinary masks. The masks range from historical classics to modern original creations. Viewers Deborah Block takes us to a shop in the city of Canals that makes intricate masks by hand.
It's party time in Venice as people dress in costume and cover their faces with the exquisite masks the city is famous for. The masks pay homage to the roots of the carnival, which goes back 1,000 years. At his shop in the city, Armando Balla carefully crafts his whimsical masks by hand, using the traditional papier-mâché method.
Masks are clearly a part of Venetian life. They allowed the wearers to express their joy of life and to party, but they also gave them privacy and to do things they wouldn't have been able to do without masks.
The master craftsman begins with layers of wet paper lined in a cast. Clay is molded into the cast, creating the design of the mask. The design of Venice's most well-known mask can even disguise a person's voice.
It allows you to put your hand inside, eat, and even smoke a pipe. The shape of the mask changes the voice by making it sound like a rumble.
And of course, the masks also help hide a person's identity, giving them an air of mystery. In fact, in centuries past, the masks allowed people of different social classes to mix and mingle.
During Carnival, you did not use titles. You met a woman on the street and you would say, "Good morning, Lady Mask."
Over 20 years, Bala has created more than 500 mask models. It takes about 3 days to make a simpler mask and a week to finish an elaborate design.
We study paintings and books to reproduce the masks as they once were. We also use our imagination and add our ideas.
For Bala, it is a labor of love. Deborah Block, VOA News.
Well, and here's what's trending. Now, a beauty pageant is sparking controversy in Uganda. Tourism Minister Godfrey Kiwanda sparked outrage in early February when he unveiled the Miss Curvy Uganda contest, saying naturally endowed women should be used as a strategy to boost tourism. Women's rights activists, politicians, church leaders, and ordinary Ugandans responded by saying the contest was state-sponsored objectification of women. Meanwhile, some Ugandans on social media argued the beauty contest would help to challenge the Western stereotype that only slim women are beautiful, saying the pageant celebrated the diversity of all body shapes, including those of African women. Well, next up, Kenya's ride-hailing company Little is expanding to Tanzania and Ghana by May and plans to raise about $50 million in capital from investors. Little, which competes with global players Uber and Taxify in Kenya, is valued at about $70 to $75 million. CEO Kamal Butabati says a minuscule number compared to its billion-dollar rivals. The company will start offering rides in capital Dar es Salaam next week and plans to launch in Accra by May, adding to its operations in Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia. Little is available in Kenya for a segment of the market that does not have smartphones. The company worked with mobile operators and introduced a short cord which allows it to identify a passenger's location and provide a ride. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good night.